your own, GB News' own Nigel Farage, and Ben Habib, formerly of the Brexit Party, who's kindly joined us as well. Ben, do you think this has finally unlocked it? Are we really now serious, or is it going to be another well-intentioned effort that doesn't deliver?
Well, can I say, before answering your question, what a pleasure it is to be here, Jacob, with you and Nigel, two great political free thinkers. And I'm not sure I know any more about this subject than either Nigel or you, but I will venture an opinion. I think the government's got it back to front, if you don't mind me saying so. Deportation, which is at the centre of this deterrence policy, is what you need when border control has failed. And there is no deportation policy or set of regulations or laws that I think can make up for a failure in border control in the first place. And it's almost like trying to pour water out of a sinking ship. You know, you just can't get it out fast enough. So we first had the Nationality and Borders Bill, and we were told that that would sort the problem out. We then had the Rwandan policy to deport people seamlessly to Rwanda. We've yet to see anyone go there. And we now got the illegal migration bill. And when you read the illegal migration bill, it starts off incredibly well, very strongly for those people on my side of the debate. You know, the Secretary of State is required to detain and then deport people who've entered the country illegally. Fantastic. But as you go through it, you realise it's been got to by people on the more liberal side, perhaps, of the Conservative Party, who, when you know, once you get to Section 51, you see there's a carve-out, actually, for the European Court of Human Rights, and giving it the right to, giving the Secretary of State the right to fall into line with ECHR rulings. And that's, if you like, a coach and horses through what would otherwise be quite a good bill. What I would have liked to have seen was language to the effect of, notwithstanding any rulings from the ECHR, this is what our policy on deportation is going to be.
Nigel, isn't this the final test for our membership of the European Convention? That if, in spite of everything, the European Court still blocks us from getting rid of people who've come here illegally, then the pressure to leave the Convention will be overwhelming.
I think, interestingly, it won't actually be the court in Strasbourg that stops this working. It'll be British judges. It'll be British judges using the ECHR, which, of course, has been incorporated into British law via the Human Rights Act. Now, yeah, you know, I know that in some ways, British Bill of Rights, what's been voted on just within the last hour, in some ways you can say the law's been updated. But all the while we're signatories to an international treaty, 9 out of 10 of our judges will always rule in favour of that treaty. So I think we've got a problem with our own judiciary. I think the real truth of it is this. I mean, the Conservative Party have failed completely on this issue. We've had promise after promise, as Ben mentioned before. Every time there's a new Rwanda, you know, Boris announces Rwanda, the Daily Mail go, hooray, it's all solved. The optimism of people is amazing. It's been catastrophic. I mean, you know, and we haven't even touched on the levels of legal migration into Britain that are now hitting all-time records. Separate debate. But I actually think this. I think that the legislation, and it reads brilliantly to begin with, is in conflict with our international obligations. And therefore, logically, what we have to do is to reconsider and change our international obligations. And we ought to do it properly. We ought to do it the nice way. Tony Abbott in Australia was so frustrated in the end that he said, to hell with the UN, to hell with what the EU are going to say and everybody else, and simply deported people, towed them straight back to Indonesia and ended the problem. I think this question of sovereignty of our borders is why we won the referendum in 2016. It was the key deciding factor that got the turnout up to sort of 10% more than many commentators thought that it would be. I think it was a bigger part of the 80-seat majority than perhaps many Conservatives actually wished to admit to themselves. And I think within the next 5 years, we are going to have a battle over membership of the ECHR, which will be almost like the Brexit debate all over again. This is going to rise to very near the top of the agenda in this country.
Because it is all about whether or not you have taken back control. It's about whether our Parliament can decide things, or whether there is an overarching body that will tell us to do something different. And that these international commitments were taken on under very different circumstances, and when we agreed to them, they didn't mean what they're now interpreted.
No, I mean, the ECHR was conceived when Germany had to be held in check, you know, without putting too fine a point on it. And I find it remarkable the EU were criticising the United Kingdom today over our suggestion that we might derogate to some extent from the convention, when actually the convention was put in place to make sure we didn't have another war in Europe.
Well, and the European Union will not sign up to the European Convention.
And they're not members themselves.
Because the European Court of Justice will not allow a superior court to overrule its judgments. And I can't think why we should be in a different position. Why should our courts be subsidiary to the European?
It's completely wrong. And, you know, there are a couple of international treaties which I think are worth mentioning in addition to the ECHR. The first is obviously the Good Friday Agreement, which requires that we remain members of the convention. And that's going to be quite a difficult one to get round. But of course, as we all know, the three of us know, the Good Friday Agreement has been observed in the breach most recently by the way that the protocol in now the Windsor Framework, which is Protocol Mark II, has been forced on Northern Ireland. And I think we need to take a really good hard look at the Good Friday Agreement if we're going to get away from the ECHR. And then the other agreement, I'm afraid, is the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, because it reiterates our commitment to the ECHR. I can't remember the exact page. I know you're very good on page numbers, Jacob. But, you know, there's a direct and declaration that we are going to, you know, stay with the ECHR.
And devolution with Scotland, with Wales. I mean, Blair was absolutely determined to Europeanise us as much as he possibly could. And one of the arguments, Jacob, against leaving ECHR is the sheer level of disruption that it would cause with all of these different agreements. But that's not an argument for not doing the right thing.
Absolutely. But the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, is a real point, isn't it? Because that will be problematic for those of us who are unionists who don't want to do anything that risks the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, there is an argument that says if you leave the ECHR, you put yourself in the position of Belarus and Russia. Why would you do that?
But that's nonsense, isn't it?
Well, of course, you know, I mean, Jacob made the point earlier that, you know, this was all signed up to in 1951, devised in the late 1940s, in a very different world, for very different reasons. And actually, through judicial activism, the ECHR has crept into areas of our life that it was never intended to.
Making law. Not adjudicating law, but making law on the hoof.
And we've been the first country to leave the European Union. You know, it shows that we do actually, when really push comes to shove on big issues. I think it's very interesting. I think this country tends to get little issues always wrong, but on the really big issues, I think we do in the end tend to get it right. Jacob, I feel this. I sense you do as well. I think the Conservatives, with this legislation, will not succeed. I think our judiciary and those in Strasbourg will make sure of that. But I think we'll go into the next election with the Conservative Party, probably against its will, and probably not being sincere, which applied to Brexit in some ways.
Some of us were sincere.
Well, no, I know that. I know
there's a sense of déjà vu here.
But well, there is. It's a very similar. It's a very similar issue, and I think the Conservatives will go into the next election saying, "Look, we tried and tried and tried. We accept we failed, not through want of trying." But a big pledge will get made. A big pledge of some kind will get made in the next manifesto.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right, that it is last chance saloon for the ACHR. If they try and stop us dealing with small boats, then the majority in this country to leave will be unstoppable.
Yeah.